The year was 2461, and Earth was a quiet planet in a galaxy filled with powerful empires and ancient races, yet it had earned a place in the Galactic Union through patience, diplomacy, and innovation rather than force. And while other civilizations boasted vast armies and ships that stretched across star systems, humans had become known for solving problems, healing the broken, and improving the lives of others in small but meaningful ways. Which is why the galactic broadcast that arrived, without warning, stunned every corner of the Union, the Varn Dominion. A cold, logical empire that ruled half a sector with precision and control, had officially declared war on humanity, and as the news spread, confusion followed, because Earth had never threatened the Varn, never taken territory, never spoken with aggression. And still, the Varn called humans a destabilizing anomaly that must be removed before their influence spread further. Claiming Earth's presence encouraged disorder and unpredictability, traits the Varn could not tolerate, and as analysts, diplomats, and ordinary people across the stars struggled to understand the Varn's motives, Earth's own leaders gathered. For a response, not in panic, but in deep, strange calm, with the United Earth Assembly meeting in orbit over Europa to discuss the situation, while crowds on Earth waited for answers, expecting fear, anger, or rallying speeches. But instead, the President of Earth stepped forward and gave only one sentence to the galaxy: "Understood. We will respond." And then the transmission ended, leaving everyone, enemy, ally, and neutral, staring into silence, wondering what humanity meant, because no warships moved, no defenses activated, and no loud threats were made, which made the silence louder than any declaration, and soon rumors spread. Some said Earth had secret weapons, others believed humans were planning surrender, and many thought they were simply too weak to resist. But back on Earth, deep inside the lunar archives, something was happening. Something quiet and deliberate, as teams of scientists, historians, artists, and thinkers gathered in private rooms, poring over maps, contact logs, and shared memories of every mission, every act of goodwill, every alliance ever made. Because while the Varn believed in control through force, Earth had grown powerful in another way, by being everywhere, in small ways that mattered, by building translation systems for alien schools, by saving crops on dry worlds, by fixing broken satellites in return for friendship, and now humans looked back at their journey through the stars and saw something the Varn had not, a web of gratitude, trust, and quiet loyalty, stretching from forgotten moons to bustling trade stations. And though no one had ever sworn to defend Earth, the leaders realized that if they reached out, if they asked, the galaxy might listen, not because humans were feared, but because they were remembered. And so they began, not with fleets, but with messages, short, simple messages sent to old friends, once visited planets, and curious observers, asking only this: if Earth is lost, who will help you fix your weather towers? Who will rebuild your broken bridges? Who will come without asking for payment? And while the Varn watched for Earth's retaliation, expecting missiles or battleships, they saw instead a different kind of movement, invisible to senses, but powerful all the same, as humanity quietly made calls, reminded others of what they had done, and asked no favors, only questions, while on the outer edges of Varn space, a scout fleet sent to observe Earth's defenses reported something strange. Earth had not mobilized, but the systems near them had begun to shift, as small colonies delayed shipments to Varn buyers, as ancient starports rerouted communications, and as shared AI systems updated code to favor Earth-standard protocols. And though these were small things, they disrupted the clean order the Varn relied on, and still Earth said nothing more, only continuing their silent work, while more and more systems reconnected with them, not through treaties, but through trust. And as the days passed, the galaxy grew tense, not because battles were being fought, but because something unfamiliar was happening, a war without weapons, a resistance made of relationships. And while the Varn prepared their next step, confident that Earth would crumble once pressure increased, they failed to understand one simple truth. Humanity had already planted its seeds deep into the hearts of countless worlds. And now, even as silence remained on official channels, something began to shift in the very rhythm of the galaxy, like the wind changing before a storm, quiet but unstoppable, as if the stars themselves were waiting to see what answer the humans would give next. The galaxy waited, silent and still, as if holding its breath after Earth's simple and strange response. Understood. We will respond. And though the Varn Dominion had declared war with full confidence and cold logic, expecting panic and chaos from the humans, there was no reply of force, no rush of ships or military movement, only stillness. And that stillness spread like a quiet fog across the stars, unsettling even the most powerful civilizations, because the humans were not doing what anyone expected, not running, not begging, not surrendering, and not attacking. And that silence made every empire wonder what Earth was truly planning. For silence, when it is calm, can be comforting, but when it stretches too long, it becomes a mystery that stirs fear. And across the Galactic Union, messages flew back and forth as leaders asked one another, why isn't Earth doing anything? And what do they mean by respond? But there were no answers, because Earth had gone quiet on all public channels, while behind the scenes, something quiet and methodical was taking place, not in bunkers or launch bays, but in the minds of engineers, diplomats, and scientists. As Earth's response to war did not begin with weapons, but with invitations. Messages sent out to old allies and forgotten friends, not demanding help, but offering support, with words like, can we help repair your damaged satellites? And, would you like a newer version of the translator we built for your schools? And at first, many thought it was a distraction, or perhaps denial, but slowly something began to shift, as the systems that accepted Earth's help began to talk to one another again. And those systems, linked by human-designed networks and upgraded tools, started to reconnect in small but powerful ways, not to build armies, but to talk, share and coordinate, forming invisible lines of trust that slowly wrapped themselves around Earth like a quiet shield. And still, Earth did not speak loudly, only continued to assist, offering improved gravity stabilizers for asteroid miners, new medical software for outposts, and faster navigation updates for merchant fleets, all free. And though many didn't see it at first, these gifts became something more than kindness. They became dependence, and soon Earth was not just helping. It was quietly becoming essential, a central piece in the quiet machinery of galactic life, while the Varn, watching from afar, grew more and more confused, sending probes and spies to scan for hidden fleets or secret weapons, but finding none, only humans working, vixing, sharing and smiling as if war had never been declared, and this strange response began to spread unease through the Dominion's cold heart, because the Varn had built their power through fear and control, and now faced something they could not measure, a power that was soft, flexible, and deeply rooted in the memories of others, because humans had long offered help with no expectation of return. And now those quiet deeds were blooming into something larger and far more dangerous than any fleet. For when Varn ships arrived at distant trade stations, they found closed doors and rerouted traffic, not from Earth's command, but by the choice of the station keepers, who remembered the human engineers that fixed their systems during breakdowns. And when Varn diplomats reached out to once neutral species, they were met with polite distance and delayed responses. Not from fear, but from hesitation, because now the galaxy was watching Earth with a different kind of attention, not as a target, but as something they didn't want to lose. And though the Varn prepared for war, it began to feel like they were preparing to attack the sky itself, because the more they tried to push, the more the galaxy leaned quietly toward Earth, and no one shouted about it, but it was there, in the subtle changes of trade routes, in the shifts in software preferences, in the way data moved through Earth-optimized systems, and Earth said nothing about it, never pointed fingers, never called for defense, only continued to offer help to those who wanted it, until slowly, without force or demand, the stars around Earth seemed to turn just slightly in its favor, not by force, but by memory and trust. And the Varn, for all their power, had never built anything like that and could not understand it, and so the silence stretched on, not empty but full of meaning, as the galaxy began to ask itself, what kind of enemy is this, and what will happen if we let the Varn go through with their plan, because Earth had done nothing wrong, had never attacked, never tricked, never taken, only given. And now the galaxy was beginning to understand what the Varn had missed, that humans, in their silence, were not preparing for battle, but for something far more lasting, and as stars flickered in the night sky over 1,000 worlds, a quiet thought began to grow. Maybe the real power was not in who controlled the strongest fleet, but in who everyone wanted to keep. And as that idea spread, the silence surrounding Earth became more than a pause. It became a question that every race, every leader, and every citizen began to ask themselves, and in that question, the future of the galaxy began to shift, while the Varn Dominion continued to prepare for battle, building warships and tightening their control over nearby systems. They failed to notice the slow and quiet growth of something far more dangerous than any weapon. A network, unseen and unspoken, spreading across the galaxy, built not with steel and fire, but with kindness, memory, and quiet loyalty, because, as Earth remained silent and sent no fleets, it continued its strange mission of outreach, sending software patches to improve power grids, medical drones to sick colonies, and learning modules for young minds on distant moons, and one by one, those who accepted Earth's help found themselves reconnected, not by orders, but by gratitude, not through military alliance, but through shared need and simple trust. And this growing connection had no name, no flag, no official treaty. Yet it began to shape the movements of trade, diplomacy, and communication, like a hidden web that slowly pulled systems closer to Earth's way of thinking. And while Earth never asked for loyalty, what it received in return was far stronger than any forced allegiance, because those who remembered what it meant to have their crops saved by human engineers or their sick healed by human doctors began to act on their own, choosing Earth-standard frequencies, updating to Earth's open-source tech, and favoring Earth-trained AI systems that translated faster and failed less. And soon, entire sectors ran smoother with human upgrades than without them. And though the Varn tried to send new protocols to enforce their systems, they found their messages delayed, their codes misread, and their influence slipping through their fingers, as if the galaxy itself had begun to resist their touch, not through weapons, but through preference, as people chose the systems that worked, the systems that helped. The systems that humans had made better, and on the surface it looked like nothing, just quiet changes, better performance, easier communication. But together it became something more, something powerful, as more and more systems linked into what diplomats started calling the human web, a soft network of improved life that spanned more worlds than the Varn realized, and each new connection made the web stronger, not through control, but through value. And now, when Varn fleets moved, they faced resistance not from ships, but from stations that suddenly didn't recognize their access codes, drones that refused to answer their calls, and AI assistants that returned only polite apologies, saying the system had shifted to a new standard. And while the Varn tried to update their tactics, they discovered that Earth's designs were now everywhere, embedded deep into navigation software, medical archives, ship repair tools, even education systems used by hundreds of species. And because Earth had always shared freely, those systems had grown, adapted, and learned together. And now, without trying to fight, Earth had become essential and more troubling for the Varn, irreplaceable. And that was when some of the Varn's own allies began to hesitate, unsure whether supporting the war was wise, because disconnecting from Earth now meant losing key technologies. Losing help, losing comfort, and in a galaxy as vast as theirs, comfort was rare and precious, and so, one by one, small colonies started to quietly pull back their support from the Varn, not in rebellion, but in caution, choosing instead to follow Earth's path of quiet resilience. And still, Earth never issued demands, never claimed control, never even asked for support. It simply continued to help, to improve, to connect, and that invisible web wrapped tighter and tighter around the stars, until it was no longer possible to tell where human influence ended and something else began. Because it wasn't just humans spreading now, it was their ideas, their habits, their way of making things better for everyone, and this subtle influence scared the Varn more than any fleet could have, because it could not be bombed or hacked or destroyed. It had grown from within, and Earth had done it without firing a single shot, simply by being useful. And in a galaxy where power had always meant force, the idea that quiet usefulness could be stronger than domination began to shake the foundations of old empires. And those watching closely realized something had changed forever, because the Varn, for all their power and control, were now fighting not just Earth, but a galaxy that was slowly leaning toward a new kind of strength, the strength of connection, of goodwill, of memory. And that strength was wrapped around Earth like a shield made of trust, invisible but real, and growing with every system that chose to stay connected. And though no one could see it, the network had already reached into the heart of the stars. The Varn Dominion, still proud and cold, moved forward with its plan of war, sending a massive fleet toward Earth's corner of the galaxy, believing that no matter what invisible connections the humans had built, strength would still rule in the end. And as the ships glided through the dark, their formation tight and perfect, their commanders believed they would reach Earth and force surrender within hours. Yet the galaxy around them did not remain still, because while the Varn ships crossed neutral space, station after station began to go dark, not destroyed but silent, closing ports, refusing scans, and sending no signals. And though this delayed the Varn's progress, they pushed forward, expecting only minor resistance, until they reached the Kepler Passage, a narrow corridor of space surrounded by gravitational anomalies, the only safe path into Earth's primary sector. And there, something happened that no one expected. For floating in the passage was not a war fleet, but a collection of civilian ships, thousands of them, freighters, hospital vessels, research craft, even old mining rigs, forming a wall not with weapons, but with presence. And on each ship's hull was the same message in dozens of languages: "Not in our sky." And when the Varn demanded they move aside, the reply came soft but firm: "We will not fight, but we will not move." And it was not Earth that sent these ships, but the colonies and people who had once received help from humans, who had once been saved by a simple act of kindness or a tool freely given. And now, without asking, they had come to stand between Earth and war. And the Varn, trained in strategy, saw no threat in this blockade. But when they tried to move through, their ships slowed, because navigation signals had been disrupted and automated systems failed to recognize new paths, all corrupted by Earth standard updates already installed in their own systems over years of use. And while no ship fired a single shot, the Varn fleet came to a stop, confused and stuck, surrounded by vessels that offered no threat but also no way forward. And on the edges of this gathering, neutral observers recorded everything. broadcasting to the galaxy what had never been seen before, a battle line made of peaceful ships, a defense formed not by orders, but by choice, and everywhere, people watched as the Varn, unmatched in firepower, sat helpless in the shadow of something they could not calculate, the will of 1,000 forgotten voices, united not by command, but by memory, and still Earth remained silent, watching, not celebrating, not mocking, just waiting, and after 2 full days, the Varn fleet turned away, not because they were beaten, but because they could not move forward. Without breaking something far more dangerous than a shield, they would have to destroy trust itself. And in that moment, their commanders understood that to fire would not end the war. It would begin one across every world that had once smiled at a human visitor, and no empire, not even theirs, could win such a war. So the fleet left, humiliated but intact, and the moment they did, the ships of the blockade moved quietly aside and returned to their lives, their silence saying more than any speech ever could. And still, Earth said nothing, never called it a victory, never claimed credit, never asked for thanks. But the galaxy remembered, and from that day on, maps changed, not in borders, but in hearts, and the stars themselves seemed to whisper of the day a war ended not with battle, but with unity. The galaxy kept asking one question long after the Varn fleet had turned away. How did humans do it? How did a species with no empire, no mighty weapons, and no army strong enough to stand against a dominion like the Varn stop? A war before it even began, and the answer, though simple, was not easy to see, because it was not written in metal or numbers or ancient power, but hidden in the way humanity had always walked through the stars, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as listeners, helpers, builders, and friends. And to find the truth, one had to look back, far before the Varn ever spoke of war, back when Earth was first given access to the galactic network, when humans were new and unknown, awkward in diplomacy, clumsy with protocol, but always curious, always learning, and in those early years, they sent missions not to rich planets or powerful systems, but to the struggling ones, the forgotten mining colonies, the isolated research worlds, the small moons with broken atmospheres, not because they were strategic, but because they were in need. And where other species saw weakness or waste, humans saw possibility, offering solar panels where lights had gone out, medicines where illness had spread, books and data for children who had no schools, and they never asked for payment, only smiled and moved to the next place. And over time, the people of those places never forgot, because when storms hit and calms failed, it was human-made satellites that held steady. When old ships broke down, it was Earth engineers who helped rebuild them, and though they did not win battles, humans won something more lasting, trust, and slowly, quietly, they became the thread that tied the galaxy's forgotten corners together, not with politics, but with action. And this was the real power behind Earth's quiet rise, not force, but value, not control, but presence. And while others built fleets, humans built bridges, and those bridges could not be seen on a map. But they were real, made of every gift given freely, every problem solved without asking for return, every system improved not for power, but because it was the right thing to do. And when the Varn declared war, expecting fear and surrender, they did not realize they were not facing Earth alone. They were facing the memories of billions, the quiet strength of a species that had already woven itself into the galaxy's soul, and that strength had no center, no leader, no secret weapon, because it lived in the small choices of people who had once been helped, who remembered kindness when it was rare, and now returned it when it mattered most. And the galaxy, watching all this unfold, began to understand what true power looked like. Not in fire, but in light, not in fear, but in respect. And even the oldest empires built on dominance and pride began to shift, wondering if perhaps they had missed something important all along. And for the first time in centuries, many leaders sent quiet messages to Earth, not with demands or deals, but with questions, asking how they too might help the smaller worlds, how they might build what humans had built. And Earth, as always, responded with open hands and open data, sharing what they knew, offering tools and training, not to lead, but to lift. And so the truth behind humanity's power was revealed, not as a secret, but as a choice, a way of living, and those who saw it clearly understood that Earth had never been weak. It had simply chosen a different path, and now that path had changed the course of the galaxy, not with force, but with something far greater, trust earned, hearts won, and a future shaped not by war, but by the quiet power of doing good. Years passed, and though peace now flowed through the stars like a quiet river, the memory of what had nearly been lost was not forgotten. And the name Earth no longer brought images of a small blue planet on the edge of space, but of something far bigger, of unity, of light, of the moment when a war had been stopped, not by weapons, but by will. And in the deep silence between, galaxies where new explorers traveled, they told stories not of mighty fleets or great victories, but of the day 1,000 simple ships stood still and made the most powerful empire retreat. And even the stars, it seemed, remembered the answer. Humanity had given when asked to kneel, for it was not defiance in anger, but strength in quiet purpose. And now, wherever human-built systems had touched, from farming bots in dry asteroid fields to translators that still help children speak to aliens in school, there was a gentle symbol left behind, a small circle within a larger one, meaning we help. And this symbol became a whisper, then a legend, then a promise, and those who carried it were not soldiers, but fixers, healers, teachers, explorers who brought with them tools, knowledge and time. And even when no one asked, they came, and even when no one expected, they stayed. And this way of life began to change even the old powers, because the younger species watched and copied, while the older ones paused and listened, and for the first time in living memory, no major war had broken out in decades, not because everyone had changed, but because enough had remembered. And at the heart of this memory was Earth, not proud or loud, but steady, still offering more than it took, still leading without leading, and in the Van Dominion, which had once sought to crush humanity. There were now schools that used human learning modules, hospitals that ran Earth-designed healing AI, and even young Van engineers who traveled to Earth to study the systems that had quietly beaten their empire. And in this new time of balance, a group of historians gathered from many worlds, creating the first galactic archive of peace. And at the center of its hall was not a weapon or a treaty, but a quiet recording, simple words from a human voice that had once spoken on an open frequency during the time of tension, saying, "We are not here to rule. We are here to help. We do not answer threats with threats. We answer with purpose, with care, with connection." And that message was now engraved into walls across 10,000 systems, and even deep spaceships used it as a call sign. And when children asked their elders why things were better now, the answer was always the same: because the humans reminded us. And in the distant corners of the galaxy where signals still echoed in long loops around dying stars, that old message still played, unchanged, and ships passing by paused to listen, not because they had to, but because they wanted to remember. And so the stars, ancient and silent, bore witness to a truth that would never fade. That power is not only what you can destroy, but what you choose to build. And Earth, once underestimated, had built something far greater than an empire. It had built hope, trust, and a memory so strong that even the stars themselves, cold and far away, seemed to hold their breath and carry the answer across the void, that the greatest strength is found not in what you take, but in what you give.